This is the e-learning podcast, episode number 7.
I wanted to talk about some tools that I usually describe as open-ended creation tools. So that's a phrase that I use a lot to describe things that are blank canvas, kind of choose your own adventure. You can go into that space with students and kind of set them free to make a movie or a website or an ebook or whatever it might be.
Welcome to the e-learning podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. My guest for today's episode is Monica Burns. She's the creator of ClassTechTips.com, and frankly, she absolutely crushes it in terms of explaining how K-12 teachers can effectively use tech in the classroom. Since the beginning of lockdowns, Monica's website has seen tremendous growth, and it makes complete sense. Teachers and parents are looking everywhere for help in their online learning, and Monica is one of the most knowledgeable and approachable experts you're going to find. If you want more from Monica, make sure you don't miss her talk on our Elearning Success Summit about sparking creativity in the classroom, which includes a list of her favorite free tools. I think you're going to love this conversation between Monica and I, where we talk about the benefits of open-ended tools and letting your students choose their own adventures in digital learning. You never know, you might learn a lot from them. We also talk about Monica's updated list of tools to create amazing interactive content, even for the little ones, and there's no email necessary. We also talk about the importance of keeping parents in the loop about the technology that's being used and its purpose, and also inviting those parents into the creation process. And finally, we talk about why schools and districts no longer have an excuse not to support teachers in their use of technology, and how leaders should embrace not just EdTech, but the feedback and the data that it offers to improve learning. But before we get started, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
The e-learning podcast is sponsored by the Elearning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hi, Monica. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Monica, I had the pleasure of having you on the E-Learning Success Summit a couple months ago. Remind me, where are you sitting now? Or I guess not remind me, but where are you sitting now? How's your COVID been for the past 3 or 4 months? What's going on?
So I am in South Carolina today. I have family that's down here that I hadn't seen in quite a bit. So made the drive down from New Jersey, which is my home base, last week. So spending a couple weeks down here. I've been working from home, wherever home might be, for the past couple weeks, or I should say a couple months now, of course, just like everyone else. So a little bit of a change of scenery, but been, really lucky to connect virtually with so many people this spring, professional development, just conversations with folks I typically see at a conference or so really trying my best to stay connected and offer resources and PD to those who are looking for some EdTech support.
Cool. Class Tech Tips, which is your website. I got to assume that this time you've probably been blowing up a little bit. Have you seen a jump in traffic, a jump of people coming and saying, are they saying, oh my God, I don't know what to do? Or is it more, I want to do it better? Or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, so there's definitely been a lot of activity on my site. So my site, ClassTechTips.com, I started in 2012. And the past spring, since the beginning of this year, because I do have a bit of an international audience, right, in addition to, March and onwards, definitely a lot of activity, a lot of people reaching out, which I'm always happy because I want to present myself as someone that they can reach out to, as a DM on Instagram or on Twitter. So I'll get questions that sometimes come through less formally that way as well. And yeah, just like I would have talked about technology integration in a school site 6 or 12 months ago, the same thing goes now with the kind of questions people are asking and the resources that they're looking for. So there are some people who have a strong foundation and want to build off of it, who are asking really specific questions that have to do with taking things to the next level. And then, of course, there are people who are just getting started or thinking about things for the first time or revisiting a conversation they had about Google Classroom or formative assessment strategies or something that they might have heard about 6 or 12 months ago, and now are realizing really needs a bit more of their attention to put that into action.
Awesome. That is fantastic. I'm glad to hear that you're realizing success, but then also it's, what I love about it is it's success through helping others. It's
Mhm.
just, it's a fantastic place to be. Um, and I love that you have a Space Force mug. That's so cool. I just noticed that. That is,
Yes, it's so funny. Right before our call today, I posted on Instagram that one of the benefits of spending time with family is that you get to use all the silly Christmas gifts that you've given,
oh
which
man.
which is true about this one as I was waiting for my K cup to get all to get all settled in. Always a good laugh and a way to start the morning.
I love that. That is fantastic. So I know that, we had talked before the show, you want to talk about a specific suite of tools that K through 12 teachers can use for effective online education. So
Mhm.
I don't want to, steal your thunder at all. In the summit, we had talked about a bunch of Adobe products, and you really gave a great screencast for, walking through those tools and whatnot. We're not going to do that today on the podcast, obviously, but why don't you either take that as a jumping off point or, introduce us to a new suite?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about some tools that I usually describe as open-ended creation tools. So that's a phrase that I use a lot to describe things that are blank canvas, kind of choose your own adventure. You can go into that space with students and kind of set them free to make a movie or a website or an ebook or whatever it might be. Um, or you can give them more structure and guidance to really connect that with your curriculum goals, with your standards, with what it is you'd like to see students produce based on the type of learning experiences they're having. So, for example, you might have students working through a series of primary source documents and synthesizing information from a variety of sources, and then creating a movie that talks about connections between different artifacts, right? So it doesn't mean that that tool is just for talking about primary source documents, right? You
Mhm.
could make a math tutorial like a Khan Academy with a video creation tool. So there's a lot of tools that fall into that open-ended creation tool kind of category, if you will. So really about giving kids space and support within them. So I love the Adobe Spark tools, of course, as you mentioned. I do some work with their team. I have a book with Ben Forda all about creativity and classroom activities for using Adobe Spark. So Spark Video, which makes movies, Spark Page, which lets you build a website or a single landing page, as well as Spark Post definitely fall into those categories. But there's others as well that educators can explore. Book Creator is one. I've led some webinars for them this spring, actually, and I've created some resources that are available on their site. So love that one. You can do ebooks with them. Just like the Spark tools, that's great for distance learning creation opportunities because you can set up a Book Creator account as a teacher, invite kids in, even if they don't have an email address, which is sometimes a struggle when we talk
Mm.
about distance learning and say a K2 or even K4, where kids might have been sent home in March and they didn't have an email, which is understandable, right?
Right.
When you talk about
Mhm.
a kindergartner not having an email address, but it impedes some of the workflow that might have felt smoother for middle and high school students who could log in and check in on things. So there's lots of these open-ended creation tools, and that's what I'm really excited about and share often with teachers to kind of give them a world of possibilities that they can either take a project that's felt really good in the past and now have some value adds or the benefits that digital tools can bring into that equation, or they can try something completely new, that they would never have thought of creating a podcast or an interview series with their students. But now that they've heard of a tool like Soundtrap or they've heard of, GarageBand, their wheels are spinning about new ways for kids to synthesize information and apply what they've learned.
Tell me this. I'm lucky enough, or unfortunate enough. No, I'm lucky
Mhm.
enough to have three K through 12 children.
Mhm.
Right all the way from the K through, through actually sixth grade right now. But
Mhm.
take me on the other side of it. So our experience has been teachers have generally been able to present the tools to,
Mhm.
as the opportunity. The kids, generally speaking, are able to absorb and dive in. I'm thinking like you were talking about video creation, creating a page, creating a post, even, like even my kindergartner, she's, has created some rudimentary sort of podcast kind of stuff, right? Using Seesaw and some of these other school apps. It's the parents who fall off the, fall off the table and a lot of times. What can teachers do, and especially with some of these more open source ones, open platform ones? I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the term they're using, where open-ended, that's what you're using, where they don't feel so lost, where they feel like they can support their child and the teacher at the same time in this remote learning kind of experience.
Yeah. So when it comes to presenting these options to families, I think it's really important to share, the what, why, and the how, right? So, and sometimes just the what is what's shared. So you have an email that you're sending home and you're saying, here's a tool that you can use. It's great. It's free. And then that's kind of it, right? So if you can really pair that together with the why, we're using this because I want your child to talk about their learning, or I want them to make a connection to something we've done in the past, or so kind of building that why in is part of that. And part of that component with the why might even include sharing some examples with families. Like you might have seen, I shared this Khan Academy video with your child, right? I'd love for them to make something just like this based on what they've learned. So that can provide some context for families to see what the purpose is and kind of where they're going with using this, that it's not just a make a movie fluffy activity, but really something that's rooted in content and visual communication.
Oh boy, I have had
right?
1,000 of those conversations, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like, why are we doing this? Like, why aren't we writing a report? Right. Well, there's reasons why we're not writing a report. And if we can communicate that, I think it's really important. And I know that sometimes I, take it for granted that I'm thinking the same thing, as someone else, as we're talking about, that why, but it's really important to be straightforward from the beginning about that. And then the last piece is the how. So the how is really the what button to press kind of part of sharing a resource with students or with families. And so you don't want to overwhelm someone with a million how-to videos, right? So because they're just not going to watch them, I know anytime I get too noisy of an email, right, I'm overwhelmed and kind of like, I'll deal with that later,
Sure.
Give them kind of the one big how. And it might be a recording to a Zoom meeting that they did as a class that maybe a parent couldn't be there for. So if you have a fourth grader who's joining Zoom on a school-issued Chromebook, while a parent is having a client meeting in another room, right? They're not going to be there to see that. How do we do this? So if you can record those and share them with families, maybe condense them and say, here, I'm giving you the whole hour recording, but the part that you're going to care about is really at minute 10. So don't even to worry about extra editing or anything like that. That could really help with the transfer. And if you if there's a teacher listening who is maybe not recording things or doesn't feel like that's the most effective way to share, a lot of how-to are available for different resources. Seesaw is a great example, actually, of one that has a fantastic help area, both for teachers and for families. And so if you're able to point people towards that exact resource, that could be really helpful as well.
The question I want to ask is, for teachers, how have you been working? You said you're doing some professional development and those kinds of things. One of the experiences that we've had on this end over the COVID, with distance learning, is that some teachers are just able to knock this out of the park, right? Some teachers are ready. Some teachers are not. Let's not even just say prepared, but technology is comfortable for them. They were already intrigued by things. They were already ready to dive into video. They were already ready to sort of be on a stage. And some teachers just, I don't want to say they phoned it in, but they just, this isn't where they're going to shine. Are there, is this something is this a muscle you can build, or just some people more ready to do this than others? Or is this a skill set that you can certainly look, okay, maybe you're not comfortable in front of a camera, but you can learn how to do this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a skill set that you can build. And even within the same school building, right? And you may have seen this with your own students, right? So even within the same physical school building, you have educators that have different skill sets. And some of that is because they heard about a thing and they were excited about this thing and they tried it out with their kids last year. And others might have just kind of luck of the draw in terms of who goes to which professional development, or this is something that I want you to do, or I want you to do, right? Might have just received more professional development on something than a colleague, that they are down the hall from, right? For no other reason than someone has to go, or there's not enough subs, or that sort of thing, right? So those kind of discrepancies within a school in terms of skill set can come from a variety of different different reasons. And so that could just be part of it, the logistics of what professional development looks like at an organization, the support levels. So if you have someone who's motivated but doesn't have a lot of support, right, in their building, that's going to change the experience of someone that is motivated, right, and has a lot of support. Just yesterday I was going through a Facebook group where someone shared that they are the tech coordinator at their school, and they've just been reassigned to be a classroom teacher next year because they're anticipating their budget's going to drop and that they are not going to have some teachers return. So, the piece there that was problematic for that person sharing was not that there's anything wrong with being a classroom teacher, but it's just there's now going to be no one to support anyone with the technology integration, right? So these are the type of pieces where there's such disparities even within one school or one district in terms of what support looks like. So, I hope, and I've found, even conversations this spring, that now because of all of this, more and more people have a vocabulary to have conversations about the type of things that we're talking about, right? So this idea that, I now know what it means to be on a video conference. I know what it means to, find this in the portal, or I might not have needed to sign into Schoology as much last year, but now it's something that's the only place I need to go, right? So I think that now that everyone has a foundation for these conversations, it'll be easier for people to know what they didn't know before and ask for specific help. There really isn't an excuse for schools to not give support to everyone who needs it, right? In the way that we've been in a kind of emergency, responsive, reactive mode this spring. I've been hosting some webinar series and some professional development just for leaders. And one thing that we've been kind of circling, coming back to is just, you can use this spring as a fact-finding opportunity to understand better, right, what wasn't able to happen really fast. But there's no point, right, in looking back at this spring if we're not going to use that information to really inform your planning and decision making for the fall, right? We have an opportunity now to be proactive instead of reactive. And all of that does come back to what teacher support looks like when it comes to navigating these spaces. And I think too, there are some schools that didn't really have a clear structure or recommendations to give teachers. So if you had a teacher that was always using Google Classroom and all the kids were just in it and it was working, and now they're just doing that from home, that transfer is going to be a lot different from a teacher that was told, okay, just do your best for the last couple months of school. You might have heard of Google Classroom. We can't help you with that right now. We're worried about, food sites and feeding everyone and all those other things that will take priority, but just do your best, right? So that sort of discrepancies have happened now. And, I really feel like they need to be addressed as much as possible in the fall, right? In a way where we can really just have more of a proactive mindset going into the upcoming school year.
And if I can borrow, and I just want to see if you would agree with this, that another guest that we recently had on the show, Michelle Moore, she's with an organization called My Learning Consultants. One of her big, the mistakes that you make when you're transitioning online is, as an educator, is trying to have all the answers, right? And this sounds like a real opportunity, especially in the K through 12 space, to let the students teach you, or let them take the lead, where it's like, excuse me, hey, we're going to try out this new tool and we want to accomplish this, but I'm going to give you the space to, try to figure it out on your own, and let's make mistakes together. Like, does that work in the K through 12 space really well?
Absolutely. I mean, as a classroom teacher myself and spending lots of time in classrooms, I was in classrooms with students all the way through February, of this year. And so that's a big piece of this puzzle of giving kids the space to explore, to try things out, to problem solve. A popular phrase in an elementary classroom is to ask three before me, like ask three of the people at your table before you come and ask me this question that you
Sure.
probably, right, know the answer to already if you just paused and thought about it for a second anyhow, right? And so that phrase, you can really bring into these conversations too, right? So a student in a classroom, might need a minute to figure something out, and it's a great opportunity to talk them through, well, where do you think that you would go to save this? What have you seen in other tools? What icon looks familiar, right? So you can talk them through those behaviors in a way that you can't do from home because you're not doing that side by side, right? However, it is an opportunity to build in some independence, not in a frustrating way, but in I have a resource for you. Let me know what you tried, and then I can show you how to do it. And so if you can kind of build that in, it takes a great level of patience and a great level of understanding from all participants, right? Because as a student, you're just like, give me the answer. As a teacher, you're just like, here it is, let's move on, right? But we all know, that if you invest that time and energy into making sure that you are kind of building that capacity for any team member, right, including a student, it's going to pay off in dividends. And so there may be a group that you have of students who are kind of your tech support for your class, right? In this, not in a that's all they do, but in a team building type of way where you have one group leader of 4 students, and when they go into breakout rooms, they may have spent some more time on this tool, or they might be the person who knows how to use this a little bit better. And the only thing, I would say with that, because that's a strategy that I've I shared in my Tasks Before Apps book, to have, student kind of team leaders, if you will, right, that might have spent more
Right.
time in Google Slides before you do a whole class activity. The only thing you want to be, especially mindful of is that it really paints a representation of your class. So it's not all students who look the same or act the same, right? So you have a nice mix of people who to go to, right, as the tech leader on something, and you're kind of rotating that in and out. It's not just the kids who, love computers or look a certain way, right? It's everyone has that capacity. And so it's a great opportunity to just be mindful about that too.
Super cool to call that out as well. I'm glad that you chose that, especially that one thing to focus on as well. The diversity and just sort of making sure everybody's involved. It's so easy for, and we've watched it, especially in the online learning. It's so easy for a student to not, I don't want to say check out, even though that's what they do, but to not participate or say, okay, hey, look, you're good at this, so why don't you go do that? And to really ask everyone to step up and make sure that there's that same sharing. I think that's a hugely important point. Talk to me about creativity outside the classroom. So students are being asked to do tasks. I know that my 3 kids, they depending on their age group, they have sort of a certain number of tasks that they need to do, or certain classes that they attend on a daily basis. But there's lots of stuff that they want to do. There's a lot of time to fill outside the classroom as well. Talk to me about that for a second.
Yeah. So, creative projects aren't just things that go along with, we finished this unit of study, make this thing, and now we're done, right? So, that idea of creativity in the classroom is sometimes only in culminating projects, right? Or the last thing that you do with a group of kids to make sure they understand. But outside of the classroom, we know that these things fall into everything that they do. And I don't mean to advocate that every student should, make TikTok videos during their free time, right? But we know that this idea of creativity isn't just something that happens in the classroom, right? They're capturing their day, they're writing or snapping pictures and talking about something that's exciting for them. They listen to a read aloud video online and they say, can't I tape myself reading a book and send it to my friend, right? So the more that you can build in those authentic experiences for kids that connect to something they might do, I made the Khan Academy example already, but it doesn't just have to be replicating a math tutorial. They could have seen something funny and they want to try it out and get the right angle, or think about how to be clear, and you can have conversations about audience and what picture looks best here, or what song should we play in the background. And those become conversations that are more than just look at this funny thing that I made, but look at this really thoughtful thing that I made that required a lot of decisions. It required me to think about things from a few different perspectives, and we know that there are so many careers for students, that students will come into that involve creativity that are not artists, right? Or are not filmmakers. And so sometimes when we talk about creativity, it's just the arts, that's what kind of comes to mind, but it's writing that email in a way that persuades someone to buy the thing you're selling, right? Like that's a creative piece. Choosing a picture to put on your company's website so that it communicates your vision, right? These are all creative skills. So it doesn't have to be just, I can draw a great picture and I'm creative, right? We really need to expand our understanding of what it looks like for kids to have those experiences that just build those creative muscles, if you will.
Have you had any, and I know this is sort of a softball or sorry, a curveball that maybe for your, have you had anybody come from your community that has said, hey, you know what? My student was working with his teacher, or he or she picked up these tools and gave me a great business idea, or actually helped me tweak my logo, or those kinds of things, just sort of unexpectedly.
Yeah. So one of my favorite examples, and I often share this when I'm talking to groups about the Spark tool specifically, is so they have a branding component. So it's free for K-12, right? You can kids can make their own logo and add a logo to their page or choose their colors, and all of that's great, right? But I don't remember exactly where I was when I was doing a session and kind of walking around tables, and everyone's, kind of trying out making movies and websites and all that. And someone kind of pulled me aside and just in that like lowered voice where you're not quite sure what they're going to ask you, right? Or they're going to tell you you've got toilet paper stuck to your shoe or something like that, right? And so the woman said to me, she's like, can I use this like for my landscaping business? Like, I'm like, yes, exactly. Like you could build a website right now for your landscaping business, right? And so I share that often when I'm talking to groups because these are transferable, right? Like you could use this for a commercial for your nonprofit organization. You could use the same movie making tool the kids are doing to practice their vocabulary words in a Spanish classroom, right? You could make that movie to introduce someone to, a charity that you run, and a call to action for making a donation, right? So that's, coming that question, I don't see it as a curveball at all, right? Because it circles right back to this idea of being in an open-ended space. There's no one way to use it. And so you can really share those examples with students too, to give them some context and to present why something is relevant. And last summer, I did a workshop with a group of middle school, high school students for Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York City. And so we were on site and we were making movies and websites, and kind of started off by saying, we are using the Spark tools actually. These are tools that, real people use, like business people use. Like, so if you,
real
right,
people, yeah.
not just us using this. It's not just like a fun thing we're doing. This is like professional level tools that we're using,
Right.
Even though we might be doing something that's different. Like they are using these to make those ads you see on Instagram. Like they are making movies here that are the same things you would see in a Facebook ad, right? So it was not an advertising class, but it's important for kids to recognize that, like I could do that, or I could make that, or that's just like this thing I know how to do, or to read something and say, I don't believe that, or I can tell they're trying to trick me to click on this, right? So then you also build in that evaluation lens that comes when kids have opportunities to create, because they know what goes on behind the scenes. They can be better evaluators when content comes their way.
It's not only this huge boosting for the kids, for the students themselves, but I think it's maybe a little terrifying event for the professionals that, you're around, you're like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I'm going to be replaced by these guys. They already know how to do, and they already know how to come up.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love it. One of the great things that we like to see as well, at least in our school district here, is that the school has a social focus to it, and so many of the students, they've either created, like the fair trade coffee, or they're looking, they're supporting an orphanage or something like that, and then they've used these types of tools in a creative way to, again, create their own logo, create their promotional materials, reach out to the community for donations, those kinds of things as well. So they can be budding entrepreneurs, even right now. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Absolutely.
fantastic. Talk to me. You said that when we had talked pre-show, you had said one of the things you wanted to talk about was sharing during synchronous learning experiences. And now so many people have talked, here on the podcast and in the E-Learning Success Summit as well about the death by Zoom. Now we're going to probably call it. It used to be death by PowerPoint, but now I guess it's now death by Zoom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, oh my gosh, I've got another class and they're going to make me sit through 60 minutes of this, or for no reason. Talk to me about sharing during synchronous learning. So when we're on, for everybody, that just means that when we're in real time together, right? You haven't given me assignment, I go away and go. No, we're actually doing it together. Over to you.
Yeah. So when it comes to the synchronous piece, I've shared kind of a similar phrase that we probably have all heard about. Couldn't this meeting have been an email? Right.
Oh
And
man.
so that same feeling should go when designing student synchronous experiences. Like if we all have to show up, like there must be something valuable about us all showing up at the same time. Because if this could have been an email, this could have been a video tutorial I could watch at a time that works better for me and my family, I want to see value in these moments. And if you are in a school where, and this of course is not the only reason, but if you're in a school where you are tackling student attendance for synchronous virtual, events, that's something to consider too. Like, are you overdoing it? Are you making sure these are valuable for kids? Because if they're not a good use of their time, like who's going to show up, right? And so, of course, that's not the only reason to consider, attendance issues and the equity component of making sure that everyone has the support they need, but it's a piece of it to when you're thinking about, what are we doing here at this time? And so if you are using synchronous experiences to bring everyone together, part of that can be around the content, right? But another part can be around community building to let everyone kind of talk and see and share and celebrate. And so if you are having everyone on a Zoom call, say at the end of the week, and over the course of the week, they've been making projects, you've been checking in on their Google Doc outline, they might have requested a video call one-on-one so you could talk up to them about or give them some advice, right? And then at the end, all of that happening asynchronously, so whenever works for everyone. Then at the end of the week, and your week might end on a Wednesday, right? But it doesn't have to be Friday, but whenever your end of that week is, you can have everyone together to really share and celebrate and give shout outs and appreciations and look at each other's work. So you might have a Padlet page or a Google slide deck or something that everyone has access to. And then they can each post a note or make their own slide that has their project and maybe has a question that they need feedback on, or a decision that they made that they weren't sure about. And then when everyone is together, maybe having 30 kids with their mic on is a little bit much, but you could have everyone together and then go into breakout rooms and kids can talk about, a struggle that they have or what they loved about one of the other kids' projects. So you can really use that time to build a community that you might feel like you are losing because everyone's not physically present in the same space. And one part that, people don't talk about as much as they did maybe 5 years ago is a flipped classroom model, right? And making decisions with flipped classrooms. Like when we're together, we use this time for together stuff, not for the things that you could do on your own at home. And the same sort of mindset is really important here as well, right? If you're doing it synchronously, there's got to be something special about it that's different than what you could do on your own.
Is there anything that, again, I kind of want to just find one of those great anecdotes if it's available, where either a teacher, someone in your community who either did something extraordinary or had an extraordinary something happen in one of these synchronous moments where what you just described, I'm happy to say that, again, just to pull from my own experience, that's happened for many of my kids where, we work on these things, we work on this project, and hey, on Thursday we're going to get together and we have a share. Either that's a math class or that's a social studies class or whatever it is. Are there any one of those like, aha, like, this was incredible, like a totally unexpected thing that happened in one of these sort of synchronous sharing things, or that just either really brought home that this is valuable moment and bonded everybody together, or something like that?
Yeah, I would say, in talking to different educators, and I've had a chance to have to work with a cohort where we've, had a couple weeks together where we get to check in. And so people share a little bit more for a few different groups. And, you really get to hear some stories about things that are working well, right? In addition to the obvious obstacles, right? Of course. But I would say one thing that I'm hearing in terms of workflows is really the ability to build on something that was working in the past where kids are feeling really comfortable. And one tool where a lot of those, like, oh my gosh, this was wonderful kind of moments that I'm seeing are with Flipgrid, where kids are able to jump on video, to see a friend, to leave a reply, and to really kind of continue the conversations that were really abruptly, cut off right in the spring, at the beginning of March. And Flipgrid is just fantastic. They have so many wonderful, it's free. They have so many wonderful resources and activities for students. One thing that I've heard anecdotally from different families that I've talked to as well, is that the idea that their child is working from home, right, has been a different way for them to interact with their classmates that sometimes has felt, a little bit better than being in the classroom. They can take a deep breath. They can, not be overwhelmed by everyone who's around them. And so I think that, comes across on video for students too. So if they're able to upload their little video message and see all of their friends, that's really powerful. But I think it's important, and you've heard me, kind of pause a few times as we talk about different things today to mention, of course, that there are students that might have loved being on video during the school year in the classroom, but then when they're home, they don't love it as much, right? They live in a noisy space. They don't have access to something with the camera. They're embarrassed about, how they look if they haven't gotten their hair done. And, so it's all those kind of things that, whenever introducing those sharing experiences or those tools that might have felt really familiar and fun, I know when I've worked with teachers in classrooms and I've introduced something like Flipgrid, I've said to the kids, if you don't love being on video, like, no worries, cover it with your hand, put on the emoji, like whatever feels good is good for me, right? And because I want everyone to be comfortable, but I want to remind people, of course, that, it's a good opportunity to reintroduce things with that same sort of mindset when kids are working at home, because there might be some things that they love doing in the classroom and that might be a little bit challenging. So kind of getting back to your big question, I would say one of the things that I've seen feel really successful, right, are the things that have to do with community building and talking and getting the kids to see their friends and all of that. And Flipgrid's a great example of making that happen.
Super cool. You've mentioned it probably 30 times in our last, over the arc of the last 30 minutes here and everything, but just dive just a little bit deeper for me on making movies for learning, for you to capture learning. Like it just seems so obvious to everyone. I mean, you've got a phone or you've got a tablet of some kind, you push record. It's built in natively to so many of these learning apps like Flipgrid and whatnot. Talk me through why is this? Maybe it's the new learning tool. Maybe it's the new pen and paper. I don't know. But what's your perspective on it, and how can we best use it?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of value adds to using video or movie making. One is getting kids to talk about something that they are learning. So sometimes that pencil and paper is a little bit of a barrier, right? Or the keyboard and Google Doc is a bit of a barrier for getting kids to share what they've learned. So if you're looking for formative assessment data in the moment, sometimes video is a really great way to check for understanding for kids. It's not to say that you're not building towards a place where they can write about what it is that they've done, but it might be a good way to get more authentic formative assessment data from students. Because if they can't write it and tell you that they've got it, or they're writing in a way that doesn't give you a clear picture of what they understand, they might communicate that better on video too. And then you're like, oh, that's where they need help, or that's where the misconception is, right? So you might get more authentic formative assessment data from students if you are using video. It also provides a way for kids to visually represent something and kind of employ some different critical thinking skills. So Spark Video, the tool that I mentioned earlier, you could include your own face video, or you could make more of a slideshow. And so there, kids have to choose images, choose icons, and that's going to require them to do some critical thinking around what belongs here, right? What picture will represent what I'm about to say? If I am searching for that picture, what vocabulary word do I want to use? If I don't get what I wanted with that first keyword search, what do I have to type in next, right? So it's going to add in all these layers of things that when you see the video, right, you might not realize had to happen in order for a child to get to that product. But that's another value add, is just the critical thinking component that goes side by side with any type of creation that kids are doing.
Fantastic. Monica, your time's super valuable. This has been a really great conversation. I want to end these conversations with one question. What are you seeing? You've alluded to it a couple of times and over the conversation here, but what are you seeing sort of for the fall, or maybe even for, I guess 2021 it would be, in terms of, are we going back to the classroom? Have we been completely disrupted, and there's going to be real fundamental changes in K through 12 learning, or are these online tools now, this is the standard by which we're all going to operate? Or maybe there's some other things that you're really focusing on for when schools open again?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of unknowns, right? And a lot of disparities in terms of what it might look like here in the US, right? In one corner of the US as opposed to another, let alone all the differences that you might see abroad. And so I'm recommending to educators who ask me, right, or school leaders who I'm having conversations with, that if you are going back in the fall, just like you would use the first 6 weeks of school to set classroom management norms, or this is how you get on the lunch line, or this is how you sign up for this class or transfer to this, or all those things that happen the first few weeks of school, building in really thoughtful and strategic use of navigating digital platforms is going to be essential if you know or anticipate that you're going to have to turn the switch back on to learning at home in October or November or February or something like that. So that doesn't mean that kids are in front of a computer the whole time at all, right? You have an opportunity for the community building and all the things that worked well going into this spring, right? The kids were together for 6 months. So in many cases, right, in many schools, or just a month or two if you're looking at a January 1st start date at an international school. So the kids know each other, and for the most part, before they went digital or went remote. So if you can use that beginning of the school year time for community building and for onboarding students, that's really important. So instead of handing out things to kids, making sure that you have the digital activities posted in the same place they would have to look if they were at home. So that's really where kind of my head is at in conversations that I'm having with school leaders and educators, trying to make the most of the time that they may have with a group of students in the fall. That being said, a recommendation I just made to a group I was talking to in New York last week or the week before was that if you are not going back together, right, there may be an argument for looping or having all the second graders stay together and now they're in third grade together with the same teacher. So you have certain norms already built in. Everyone knows each other, as opposed to here's 30 kids that are learning each other's names over Zoom, right? That's challenging. The same thing goes for high school, that if you are looking to start the year, you might decide that you have kids not with 6 or 7 classes trying to replicate a 9-period day, but instead having kids do 3 courses, right, for a little bit longer, and then switching up, just the same way you would at a college level. So I don't, right, in the blocking that way. So I don't think there's one obvious answer for any of it, but just important for people to understand options and make the choice that's right for their school community.
Monica, this has been a fantastic conversation. I love talking with you. You're so straightforward and you just know what's going on. I really, really appreciate all the valuable insights you've given us today. I hope that we'll talk again, maybe another 6 months, and see where you're at.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the E-Learning Podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with 1 or 2 of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the E-Learning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, you can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.